Okay, this lecture or presentation or just raw, unedited, unplugged talk by me is in some part on der Historikerstreit of the late 1980s, really 1986 to 1988 in Germany, between mainly Ernst Nolte and Jürgen Habermas, but also including people like Andreas Silgruber, who was on the side more or less of Nolte, and then there are others on the side of Habermas, but don't need to go into all the names here. Certainly, the official German establishment position was strongly in favor of Habermas against Ernst Nolte. But I really want to talk more about the aftermath that had on historiography, particularly regarding writings that deal with both the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, but also under Lenin, and National Socialist Germany. But also going back into the 1920s and the Weimar era. So Ernst Nolte, before the historians' conflict, was probably best known for his book, translated into English under the title The Three Faces of Fascism. Literal translation from German would be The Epoch of Fascism. A comparison of the development ideologically of Action Française under Charles Maurras, Italian fascism, and German National Socialism. This book was actually very popular among leftists because it broke with the totalitarian model. The totalitarian model basically stated, coming out of the United States, Friedrichsen and Brzezinski being a Polish emigre, that the structural similarities between the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, and National Socialist Germany were far more similar than any differences. And so we could categorize these regimes as aspiring to total control through a mass mobilization, political police, state control over propaganda organs, hierarchical organization of society under a single political party with a defined ideology, or at least an ideology trumpeted in propaganda. In reality, of course, the interpretation of National Socialism and Marxism-Leninism in both cases was really what the leader said. This is another important structural similarity in the totalitarian school. Der Führer for National Socialist Germany, El Duce for Italy, and of course, Vosges, Stalin for the USSR. All right. What Nolte did was said that what you had was very different ideological differences between the so-called fascist movements in Italy and Germany, and Marxism-Leninism in their ideology that fascism was a reaction to Bolshevism, Marxism-Leninism, and therefore it was a reactionary movement. It rejected the results of the Enlightenment coming out of the French Revolution and into World War I, and of course accumulating in the Bolshevik Revolution and the establishment of Communist Party rule in the Soviet Union. Three Faces of Fascism is a good book. I recommend it. Particularly enlightening to see kind of ideological roots already before Italian fascism in Action Française under Charles Marat. But certainly the idea of fascism and National Socialism being reactionary, radical movements that come in opposition rather than something themselves. This is the kind of a root we'll see of Nolte's later ideas that get him in trouble. Although at this point in 1969, nobody has any problems. And in fact, he's very welcomed by the left with the Three Faces of Fascism because it rejects the totalitarian model of equating National Socialism, in particular, with Soviet communism. Brzezinski and Friedrich, working off the work of Hannah Arendt, Origins of Totalitarianism, in which the structures of these systems and their similarities are emphasized. But I also want to note, when we get into the always watered down and dumbified and ethnicized and other changes in when it comes across the Atlantic to the Americas, and when it concentrates not on structures, even though totalitarianism as a political theory developed, as I said, in the U.S. One of the developers, American, Brzezinski, he becomes a U.S. citizen, but I'm going to count him as Polish. His Weltanschauung is very much Polish, is why he's so anti-communist and anti-Russian. Hannah Arendt, earlier, I'm not going to count her as American at all. I'm going to count her as an assimilated German-speaking Jew. She, of course, is long gone by the time of the historians' dispute. But you can see in her Origins of Totalitarianism, the National Socialist part still holds up pretty well. Soviet part, not so well in the details because opening of the archives, but she certainly stresses the structural similarities rather than going for, well, because they have ideologically stated differences, because the reasons for them arising ideologically are very different, which is Nolte's original idea that he develops further in the 1980s, that they are complete opposites, rather that she stresses, as does other people in the totalitarian school, such as Brzezinski. What is mentioned, of course, by Nolte is that the Germans, not so much the Italians. The Italians are not very repressive, but the Germans end up, under the National Socialists, committing many of the same type of crimes that had already been committed in the USSR, not only under Stalin, but already going back to Lenin. And we'll see how somebody who really, I think, following in Hannah Arendt's footsteps, and she too was ethnically Jewish, she's from Canada, Robert Gellately, he manages to kind of invert Nolte and have a perfunctory denunciation of Nolte in his 2007 book, like a paragraph, but because it's just an inversion, when you read the actual text, the evidence, he's pretty much following the same type of line, much more so than Snyder, whose book comes out in 2010, Bloodland, who doesn't mention Nolte at all, except the correspondence between Nolte and Foret is a source listed in the bibliography, but in the text he doesn't have any mention of Nolte. If he was wiser, I don't want to say smarter, he's a pretty smart guy, I had a limited correspondence with him when I was in Ghana. He would have done what Gellately did and said, no, what I'm doing is completely different, the exact opposite of Nolte. And then just did what he did with the comparison and noting the reaction of the Germans, noting the fact that the Germans are engaging in activity that is, while radical and extreme, has a core of fear that is legitimate. And if you read the Gellately book, which I've read many times, it's quite clear because he doesn't pull any punches with Stalinist atrocities or their involvement in communist activities in Germany and other Central European countries such as Hungary. But he does have perfunctory denunciation claiming that the main motivation for Nazi atrocities was anti-Semitism rooted in German nationalism, and that opposition to communism was just the outgrowth of that because they wrongly believed that the Jews were communists. But he himself presents lots of evidence that there's lots of Jewish communists doing lots of very bad things in the Soviet Union, as well as for a brief time before things are stabilized in the Weimar Republic in Germany, and for a while there's the Soviet Republic in Hungary under Bela Kun, and Bela Kun and his entire, almost his entire government around him at the top in this briefly communist regime in Hungary before Horthy comes to power is predominantly ethnically Jewish. And so Gellately is very clever, I think, in doing that. And I think one of the things why Gellately does that, and Snyder does not, Gellately, as I said, is ethnically Jewish. He knows how this game is played. He knows what he's got to do. So he puts in a whole paragraph saying, I'm not like Nolte at all. I'm the exact opposite of Nolte. And then does the Nolte thing. Right? Smart guy. So following the stereotype of the smart Jew. Snyder, smart guy, but not so clever. Not hip to the way the game is played. So he didn't put that paragraph in. Right? Even though much less than Gellately. He does not. He's not really following Nolte, except to say that one, the Soviet Union under Stalin, like Hitler, is engaged in horrible, awful atrocities, including genocide. So we have the similarities here. Mass shootings of people based upon their ethno-racial categorization. Particularly, he talks about the Polish operation 37 and 38. There's also a German operation, which, if we want to talk about the influence on the National Socialists, is very important. I deal with it here in my book, Years of Great Silence, on ethnic Germans in the Soviet Union. But we'll talk about this, but more stuff. Not Gellately and Snyder don't deal with it so much, but the National Socialist government, as well as the government before it, the Weimar government, were very, very well aware of the persecution and oppression of ethnic Germans in the Soviet Union. So it wasn't just a matter of, oh, look what they're doing to the Russians and Ukrainians. If they take over Germany, they'll just do that to us. It was, they're already doing it to us. The Germans that left Central Europe in the late 18th, early 19th century, they already have been starved, deported, sent to labor camps, shot because they are German. Right? So, and I'm not going to go into, is it because they're German as an ethnicity, or German as a race, or German as a culture? or German as a nationality. I'm just going to cut the Gordian knot, like Victor Krieger said. It's anti-German. I don't care, that there's no advanced scientific justification by the Soviets claiming, it's because they have a different genetics and biology. The Francine Hirsch argument that we only have racism, and of course nothing is as bad as racism, if it's a exact copy of the genetic biological justification of Nazi Germany, is ludicrous. Right? Because the South Africans had apartheid without that. There's no, it's a cultural justification in the case of South African apartheid, very similar to what the Soviets do. But I'm just going to say it's anti-German. Right? The Soviet government was engaged in anti-German measures of extermination against the German population in the USSR, right, before there was any such anti-Jewish activities by the government of Germany. And in fact, if we look at the documents from Germany and the first deportation eastward of Jews from Germany and Austria to ghettos, it specifically justified as retaliation for the Soviet deportation of the Volga Germans, which had occurred earlier, and the fact that the man who was head of Ministry of Transport, then called the People's Commissariat of Transportation, the NKPS, in the Soviet Union was Lazar Kaganovich. Now, Lazar Kaganovich was ethnically Jewish, and I'm not going to accept any claims that he's not Jewish because he didn't go to synagogue. I will note, before everybody starts to, claim that communism is a Jewish ideology, rather an international ideology that had a lot of Jews in it, that Kaganovich was an international communist loyal to Stalin, a Georgian, so he wasn't a member of any ideological movement that was specifically Jewish. He wasn't a Bundist, he wasn't a Zionist, he was a communist who was Jewish, and there were many of them, and this is one of the primary reasons for the Holocaust. Particularly, we'll talk about Sonderkommando R on the local level, the recruitment of Germans in Transnistria, who are involved in the mass shootings of some 25,000 Jews. Those people all said that they were doing it for revenge for what happened in 1929 to 1938, which you had first forced collectivization of agriculture, mass dekulakization, people deported to special settlements in the far north, as Urals, in Kazakhstan, Siberia, as kulaks. Holodomor, artificial famine created primarily in Ukraine, but you had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of ethnic Germans in various parts of the Soviet Union, particularly Ukraine, but also the Volga and Kazakhstan, die of starvation in the 1930s. And there had been famine earlier in 1921, 1922. That hit the German communities very hard. You have the German Operation 37 and 38, part of the Great Terror. Some 46,000 Germans are executed in the Soviet Union during these 2 years, 29,000 or so during the German operation. So we have all that. The people that served in Sonderkommando R, almost all of them had lost relatives to one of these events and considered their participation in the killing of Jews to be revenge for the fact that in 1934 to 1938, when you have the German operation, you have a very high percentage of high-ranking NKVD members who are Jewish. So while Yagoda is no longer head of the NKVD by 37 and been replaced with Zhezhov, many of the people that had been brought in by Yagoda were still there, including Israel Laplevsky, head of the NKVD in Ukraine, and his number two man, Lev Reichman. And of the 55,000 or so people shot during the German operation, not all of them ethnically German, over 18,000 occur in Ukraine. It is the largest number of people shot in the German operation. Comparatively very few shot in the Volga region, although there's a lot shot in Siberia, a lot shot in Kazakhstan. The same areas that had suffered from decolonization and famine as well. Why there's a lower number of people shot in the German operation in the Volga, it's not particularly clear, but there's actually more people shot in the Gulag operation in the Volga region than in the German operation, particularly the Volga German Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. And of course, there are a number of Germans from the Soviet Union, particularly from Ukraine, the Black Sea region, that had fled the Bolsheviks, gone to Germany, were around giving this information during the Weimar period and later into the National Socialist period. Both Karl Stumpf and Georg Leibbrandt worked for the National Socialist regime. Georg Leibbrandt worked under Alfred Rosenberg. So they were well aware of it, particularly during the 32-33 famine, Holodomor. There was a specific organization in Germany called Bruder in Not, or Brother in Need, to provide food to starving ethnic Germans in Ukraine and other parts of the Soviet Union. President Hindenburg himself contributed to this organization to feed Germans being deliberately starved to death by the Soviet regime. So it was well known under the Weimar era and, of course, into the National Socialist era. So there is a big component of revenge. It's not talked about because evidently it's okay to kill Germans in the 30s because other Germans killed Jews in the 40s. Right? This is the typical American logic because everything gets ethnicized one way. All right. So the historians dispute itself. As Nolte said, that German history needs to be rehabilitated, that what happened in the 12 years of National Socialism was no worse than any other place, particularly the communist countries, the Soviet Union, Cambodia under Pol Pot. And in fact, Soviet atrocities had begun earlier. German atrocities were in many ways a reaction to this. They saw that there were lots of Jewish communists committing atrocities. They saw that there were Jewish communists attempting to take over Germany in the immediate aftermath of World War I, including the Bavarian Soviet Socialist Republic under Kurt Eisner, who was Jewish. Head of the Communist Party, Paul Levy in Germany, the KPD was Jewish. Rosa Luxemburg, the Spartacus communist uprising in Germany was Jewish. Right? And of course, at that time, before 1927, the Soviet Politburo has a large Jewish component with Kamenev, Zinoviev, and Leon Trotsky. Zinoviev is talking about, we need to kill tens of millions of people to bring socialism to Europe. There is legitimate fear and legitimate connection between Jews and communism. All right. So, but what Gellately does is he says, it was the Nazis hated Jews, and therefore then they went against the communists. But Nolte had earlier kind of put it the opposite. The communists were the main driving force. And this is somewhat repeated earlier by Arno Meyer in Why the Heaven Did Not Darken. Meyer himself, Jewish from Europe, had escaped from the Holocaust. Jürgen Habermas claimed that the Holocaust was absolutely unique, absolutely singular. Nothing was nearly as evil or bad. And when given these other examples, he would come up with the worst possible excuses to justify their atrocities, including the claim that, well, the Cambodians, they're not civilized. They're not advanced people. They're primitive. I mean, the most racist crap you could imagine. But this is typical. This is typical of these people. They claim that in the name of anti-racism, to be these types of things. But if anybody knows anything about the history of Cambodia, obviously Jürgen Habermas, being a complete idiot, really did not know anything about Cambodia. They know that it was an advanced civilization in Cambodia. Angkor Wat was built there. The temples, the physical infrastructure, even some of the irrigation out of Lake Tonle Sap and the Mekong are still there from when there was very advanced civilization in Cambodia. All right? But there's something interesting. If it's all about civilized Western industrial societies, why was it acceptable for the Dutch after the Nuremberg trials, after they hanged Germans for having death squads, to do the exact same thing the Einsatzgruppen had done in the Soviet Union, but in Indonesia, the Dutch East Indies? This is something that is never brought up. These people, they basically want to have, where only Nazism is evil and everything else is okay. Stalin is okay. Right? They say you can't compare Auschwitz to the Gulag. Well, I mean, at most, the number of people that died at Auschwitz was 1.1 million, about which a million were Jewish. Minimum number of people to die in the Gulag camps and colonies, the corrective labor camps, corrective labor colonies. I'm not counting special settlers or the labor army or other institutions of forced labor. Certainly not GUPV, the main administration for prisoners of war and deportees. So I'm just going to count Gulag because that's what they used in the original historian dispute. 1.7 million registered deaths in the camps, corrective labor camps, ITLs, and corrective labor colonies, ITKs. But we know there was a policy to release people that were about to die and let them die on the way home, or a few hours later, or a few days later, a few weeks later. And these people obviously dying from maladies, primarily malnutrition, but also exhaustion, that they had acquired in the camps and colonies. How many, we don't know exactly. The best estimate I've seen out of Cambridge says 800,000. So 2.5 million people dying in Gulag. Now this is much more than Auschwitz. This is almost Auschwitz and the Operation Reinhardt camps put together at this point. Almost all of the death camps. All 6 of them. And there is more, because that's a minimum estimate. There is some estimates that as high as 6 million people released from the Gulag who died within less than a year of their release from health problems they suffered in the camps and colonies. Now, I think that number is way too high. I'm willing to accept the 800,000 number, but 2.5 million, right? And we are told that those 2.5 million people were far less than the 1 million Jews that died in Auschwitz. That is the position of Jürgen Habermas, the position of Deborah Lipstadt, the position of the establishment in Germany and the United States. Well, who's being the racist now? Why is the Jew worth 2.5 Russian, German, other peoples? Well, what type of bullshit math is this? So I reject that. As I said, though, Habermas is an idiot. He really is truly an idiot. There's no other way to put it. He wanted German history to begin in 1949 and forget everything about before because 12 years of National Socialism. Nobody suggested that's what the Russians should do. Nobody suggested what the Uzbeks should do. Nobody suggested what the Mongols should do. We see all kinds of successful examples where oppressive regimes have been successfully incorporated into usable history. Only Germany is deprived of this right. Even the Dutch are allowed to justify, to whitewash, to incorporate into usable history their massacres after Nuremberg in Indonesia. The Dutch were hanging Germans for far lesser crimes than they were committing at the time in Indonesia from 1945 to 1949. Hypocrisy. I will have none of it. All right, enough of that. All right, by 1988 or so, the historian dispute died down in Germany. It doesn't really get resolved other than the fact that the establishment comes out full-fledged in support of Habermas against Nolte. Nolte is considered to be completely wrong, completely evil, trying to rehabilitate National Socialism, when in point of fact, the only people trying to rehabilitate anything were the left rehabilitating Stalin. In the case of Habermas, rehabilitating Pol Pot, of all people. Well, because Cambodians just weren't civilized enough to not deserve to be exterminated, You don't have, which of course wasn't even true historically when we look at Angkor Wat and the accomplishments in terms of architecture and other physical infrastructure in Cambodia in previous times. Obviously, by the time the Khmer Rouge came to power in Cambodia, after a very long time of decline, the loss of power to the Vietnamese, the colonization by the French, the war with the massive U.S. bombing. Yeah, Cambodia was in bad shape. It wasn't an advanced country in 1975 like Germany was in 1941. But really, this is our moral arbiter. This is what has replaced previous systems of morality. For a philosopher, Habermas is an extraordinarily immoral and amoral person. In 1989, Germany is unified, and we kind of don't have the emphasis because the DDR, now incorporated into the BRD, had never had this kind of German guilt. It had been that those that were National Socialists were all killed by the communists. Not all, but a lot of them through the special camps of the NKVD, of 160,000 in the DDR that were, well, before it became the DDR, 160,000 that were in the Soviet occupation zone in NKVD special camps. Over 43,000 died. But basically, this was their kind of a fast Stalinist solution to the problem. We just kill all the members of the Nazi Party, and the Germans that are left, well, they were obviously people who must have opposed National Socialism. Now, brutal at the time, but long term, far less damaging than the type of crap that Habermas and the American occupation were still imposing on Germany in the west of the demarcation line in the 1980s. Now, it gets really warped when it comes over across the Atlantic, because in Germany, and they can only have this debate in Germany, it's all about German guilt. How bad and evil are the Germans? All right? It's not so much about who the Germans victimized, although the Jews come up at the top here. But other people writing about this, Hobsbawm and others, do talk about other national socialist atrocities, such as starving to death of Soviet prisoners of war, killing of Slavs, in particular the siege of Leningrad, where some 900,000 people starved to death. Right? These are obviously not Jewish victims for the most part, but Russians. In the U.S., it's all about victims because of events that had happened earlier, starting around 1967 with the Six-Day War in Israel, kind of victimization Olympics to make the Jews the greatest victims ever, and to make the Holocaust singular and make the Holocaust unique, and to basically trivialize and sometimes outright deny, but especially diminish the moral weight of any other atrocity that was not the Holocaust, where the victims were not Jewish, like Habermas's dismissal of the Khmer Rouge. The Cambodians, they're not civilized people, so it doesn't matter that millions are exterminated in horrible, awful ways. Right? And this is really, well, interestingly enough, it is the pushback and opposition to that comes first after the historian dispute in the 1990s. So, where are we here in my notes? Yes. So, in 1992, there is a book published called The American Holocaust by David Stannard on Native Americans. Now, I'm not going to debate whether it's accurate to call what happened to the Native Americans as a whole genocide or compare it to the Holocaust or anything. But the point is, it was leftists who were bringing up the issue of Native Americans who were first countering the Holocaust as unique narrative. So David Stannard is the first one in 92. And this is because the idea of the victimization put themselves in a trap. Because the Jews want to lead all the other people of color, which they think that they're not white for some reason, in this kind of victimization hierarchy. So they'll be at the top as the most oppressed and persecuted peoples, and then blacks and Native Americans, Hispanics, everybody else below them, and they'll lead this coalition of the oppressed. The problem was none of the other groups were having that the Jews were the most oppressed people. Not the Native Americans, not black Americans. Right? They did not care about the Holocaust. They did not think it was something that they need to bother themselves with. It didn't occur in the United States. Wasn't part of their political struggle in the United States. Was something that was being imposed by a small minority to try and take leadership of their groups. And we see, starting with groups like the Black Panthers, strong rejection by various leftists who are from actual non-white groups, right? People that physically look non-white. In this case, Native American, but in case of the Black Panthers, obviously blacks, etc. And then the next thing we have is the big push that the Holocaust is unique and everything else is morally insignificant. And this is the book by Deborah Lipstadt, Denying the Holocaust, in which she claims to compare the Holocaust to any other crime ever is to deny the Holocaust, right? And denying the Holocaust is the worst thing you can do, and you should be thrown in prison or executed for doing it. Certainly not allowed to have any decent job or publish if you think that there are other atrocities that are genocide that should be equal or roughly equal to the Holocaust. All right, so this is the Lipstadt book. And following this is a book by Stephen T. Katz in 1994, the next book called Holocaust and Historical Perspective. It's supposed to be multi-volume. He only wrote the one volume because, guess what? Nobody buys the Holocaust is unique bullshit. If nothing else, we had Rwanda occur at this time. It basically proves, yeah, there are other genocides. Yeah, there are other people murdered in large numbers because of who they are. Yeah. All right. So and of course, earlier though, we had things like the Armenian genocide and what happens in the USSR under Stalin, what happens in Cambodia under Pol Pot, various crimes in China under Mao Zedong. Well, then, finally, in 1996, we have Alan Rosenbaum's The Holocaust Unique. This is supposed to be a debate, but it's completely one-sided in favor of the Holocaust is unique, even though there is one essay by David Stannard in there. The rest of the essays, including a very bad one by Barbara Green denying the genocide of the Ukrainians in the Holodomor in 1932 and 1933, are basically genocide, denial of genocides that are not the Holocaust. Right? So, which is basically what the idea of Holocaust uniqueness is. And this is how it's expressed in the United States, because everything gets dumbed down, everything gets ethnicized one way, everything gets made into me. But in the opposite way of the Germans, because in the historians' dispute is Jürgen Habermas claiming that we Germans are the most evil people ever. Nobody can be as evil as we. Whereas in the United States, it's the Jews. We, the Jews, are the most persecuted, oppressed people. Even in America today, blacks don't have it as bad as us Jews. Right? That literally is the position that was being taken by people like Deborah Lipstadt. Even today, she takes that position pretty much. And people like Stephen T. Katz. But they pretty much lost control even over genocide studies, which is now largely on Rwanda, not the Holocaust. And even Holocaust studies, where the issue of what the Holocaust unique hasn't been a question in decades. It's not something that Holocaust scholars today actually write about at all. After the 90s, it becomes a question looking back, well, why were people spending all this time and energy on this stupid question? How dumb were they? All right. You're going to try and prove that the Armenian genocide and Stalin's atrocities were morally insignificant compared to the Holocaust? Why? What is your motivation? Other than, well, if we can make the Holocaust unique, we get more money for Israel, which is what Ward Churchill argues in 1997, Little Matter of Genocide. He's got a lot of controversy. But his book is pretty good in that, unlike Stannard, who's just the Native Americans, he brings in other examples, including the Soviet example, including the Armenian examples. Well, again, this is an attack on the Holocaust is unique school from the left. And I think it's the reason why it goes away, because it's not Nolte and people on the right in the United States that say, no. It's people on the left, Native Americans, scholars in particular, make it go away. And in 2001, 9/11 kind of shift from all of this into other things for a while. And then the Gellately book comes out in 2007. I said Gellately is very clever in that he says, well, I'm doing the complete opposite of Nolte. But then you read the text and it's really, okay, but in the mirror image, it's the same. It's the same except you just reversed it. But in practice, that's just a really clever move. And he doesn't get a lot of shit for this book on that point. Ironically, what he gets mostly attacked for is claiming that Lenin was basically forerunner of Stalin, that everything that Stalin did had been done on a less intense scale, a less grandiose scale by Lenin already between 1918 and 1921. This is an argument Alexander Solzhenitsyn made in 1974 and got lambasted for. But the issue of comparing the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, the issue of National Socialist atrocities being in reaction to what was happening in the Soviet Union, that one little paragraph attacking Nolte, it's like magic protection. That, plus he himself was Jewish, but that doesn't always work. If we look at people like Norman Finkelstein, coming out and criticizing Israeli policies in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So, Gellately was the main text I use in teaching this period of history for advanced classes in both Ghana and Kurdistan. I think it's an excellent work. I think the Nolte part, he may have been thought he was sincere, but I think it really was. If I put this in, nobody will notice that, yeah, it's a mirror image of Nolte, which means it's basically the same, but just turned around. All right, but I mean, the other side of the coin. And Nolte, and Meyer say Nazis go after Jews because they perceive Jews to be communists. All Jot is saying is that Nazis go after communists because they perceive the communists to be Jews. Right? Now, obviously, the first one makes more sense in that there's a lot of Jewish communists like Kaganovich, like Yagoda, like earlier Kamenev and Zinoviev. Right? It's obvious that not all communists are Jews. But there is a disproportionate number of Jews who are communists. It's not the majority, but certainly significantly higher proportion than among many other ethnicities, particularly as we move from the 20s into the 30s when the Latvians start to fade in the Soviet Union. And some of the other overrepresented groups, the Chinese, are no longer visible. Snyder comes out with Bloodline in 2010. He much less in the line of Nolte than Gellately. I used his book too when I was teaching in Ghana and Kurdistan, but it's not as good as Gellately because Gellately is an expert on German National Socialism, so he covers all of the period basically from 1914, the start of World War I, all the way up to 1945, the end of the war, and the expulsion of ethnic Germans from Eastern Germany and Central Europe. Snyder is much more narrow. The Bloodland is only Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, the Baltic states, parts of Western Russia. He's not counting Germany itself, the political developments there, and how they're influenced by events in the Soviet Union as an entirety, including Central Asia and Siberia, where a large section of the Gulag is, people dying of forced labor and malnutrition. In large numbers already in the 1930s, long before World War II. So he gets a lot of crap of kind of revising Nolte's idea of comparing the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, of noting influences, reactions of the Germans from what occurs in the Soviet Union. But he's not nearly as Nolte-esque as Gellately. Gellately appears to be left so he has one paragraph denouncing Nolte. And then he doesn't mention Nolte ever again. It's in the introduction. Very clever. Much approved. I think he's sincere, actually. But if it's subterfuge, more power to him. I mean, he's an old guy now, retired, but even if he was being insincere in that paragraph, if he was being insincere in that paragraph, I like it even more, right? Because he knew what he was doing, and he avoided the problems that Snyder got from Jacobin and other leftists. Of course, Snyder himself was a left. I think Gellately is actually probably considerably to the right of Snyder on contemporary politics, despite everything. It's just that, just as I said, Gellately much cleverer, much more wiser. Well, I'm not going to say smarter because uh, Snyder's not stupid. It's particularly his scholarship. Although his last three books are just, I think, polemics against Trump. But I didn't read his last book on the Holocaust, Black Earth. I heard that was fairly good, but I have read Bloodlands a number of times and used it. Less than I used the Gellately, primarily because the Gellately is much more thorough, covering both territory and chronology. All right, so I wanted to go over we cover in this book, right? The Germans, all the way back in 1918, are aware, and the Germans in Germany, including the Weimar government and the National Socialists, what is happening to Germans in the Soviet Union. Right? So I just want to go over, when you talk about singularity, uniqueness, and Holocaust. Well, we have similarities. So we have mass shootings. So in 1937, 1938, 46,000 Germans out of a population of a little over a million, oh, almost 5%, are shot and killed. Right? Now, it's not as many as Einsatzgruppen killings of Jews, but here again, I'm not seeing a qualitative difference. It's only, I mean, we're haggling over price at this point. Mass deportation. Right? The mass deportation of Germans, of course, begins much earlier than the mass deportation of Jews. Right? And as noted, it's the mass deportation of Germans out of the Volga from 3rd to 20th of September 1941. The head of the rail, the head of the transport, the head of the creating of itineraries for the shipment of people to areas where large numbers will die due to a known lack of food, housing, and medical care, right, occurs before the first shipment of Jews out of Germany and Austria into the ghettos east. And those deportations are specifically justified by the National Socialist government as a retaliation against the Soviet deportation of the Volga Germans. Camps. Now, granted, there are no execution camps using poison gas on a large scale to execute ethnic Germans and other internees in the Soviet Union. There are lots of labor camps, and lots of people die in them, again, from known lack of sufficient food, housing, medical care, known over working imposition of inhumane work conditions and very long work hours upon the internees, right? Including, of course, some 182,000 ethnic Germans in the labor army who do their labor army service in Gulag camps. Right? So these people are not charged with any crime. They are not given any trial. They are not even given a fixed sentence. Right? So I got a whole chapter here in the book on the labor army. Right? The number of people who die in both the camps in the labor army as well as in civilian commissariats where they work under NKVD supervision, particularly People's Commissariat of Coal for men and People's Commissariat of Oil for women, is about 60 to 70,000, some estimated higher, right? Total number mobilized 316,000. So we're talking around the order of 20, maybe even as high as 25%. Granted, percentage-wise, that's much less than the deaths in Treblinka or even Auschwitz. Right? But we're just tackling over price here. We have camps, we have large numbers of mortalities. Ethno-racial targeting, this is there. I'm not going to quibble with it. You don't have. They're not putting the Germans into special settlement and labor army work sites because of any type of genetic or DNA justification. Well, no, but there was never any of that in most systems of discrimination. They're doing it because they were German. It was anti-German. Right? Whether this anti-Germanness has a genetic component or not, I really don't care. And of course, nobody being loaded onto a train to be sent to Kazakhstan and then loaded on another train to be sent to the Urals to work digging up the frozen soil where Bakalstroy was constructed to put a foundation for a iron works. None of those people cared that they were being targeted on the basis of a primordial Germanness that was cultural forever rather than DNA or genetics. I mean, obviously, the average German Koholz farmer from eastern Ukraine or Crimea or the Volga region or even the city dwellers probably did not have any understanding of racial genetics to begin with. But they were very well aware they were being targeted for being German, very well aware they were being repressed by Russians and other nationalities. You see them consistently talk about being deprived of national equality and all rights and privileges and power being vested in Russians and whatever the titular nationality was, often Kazakhs, sometimes Kyrgyz. But most often they just refer to Ani, them, other people, which included Russians, but included other people as well. A group which will go unnamed, but it's the reason why you have the massacres by Sonderkommando R in Transnistria. So I think coming about of modern historiography, while I like Nolte and I don't want to throw him under the bus, I do admire Gellately's kind of approach. I think that Snyder completely ignoring the presence of Nolte is what got him in trouble, and he wasn't nearly as Nolte-esque as Gellately. I actually don't mention Nolte or Gellately. I think I mentioned Snyder in here, but I'm not doing any comparison here. There's nothing about National Socialism other than I think I have one footnote noting that the repression of ethnic Germans in the Soviet Union, particularly the 41 deportations and the special settlement regime and the labor army, forced labor, is overshadowed by the Nazi extermination of Jews during the Second World War. So I have that in a footnote. I also note that it's overshadowed by the expulsions in 45 and 46 from Eastern Germany and Central Europe of other ethnic Germans, because there are a lot more of them than the Germans in Russia, and they are allowed to talk. They don't have years of great silence once they arrive in the Bayard, West Germany. But again, this is rough, this is uncut, this is raw, this is unedited, this is unplugged. But just my kind of thoughts on these issues. Hopefully, I won't get too much feedback here that's terribly negative. But I think now, in the year 2010, Snyder's book comes out, despite the problems he's had, that the historiography has kind of righted itself again. We're back to noting the kind of equal oppression, equal horrors of the Soviet regime, particularly under Stalin, with National Socialist occupation of places like Poland and Ukraine, that we recognized back in the United States in the 1980s, before the historians debate and before Lipstadt's horrible book Denying the Holocaust comes out in 1993. So in 2022, I would say, yeah, Gellately, even though he's got that one paragraph, and Snyder, and other works, the Black Book of Communism coming out of France, is particularly the chapter on the Soviet Union by Nicholas Wirth, and other works by Nicholas Wirth, Cannibal Island especially. We're back into real history. The historiography has kind of balanced out. I mean, there are still Stalinist idiots out there, but the days of the 90s when Lipstadt was treated as a virtual god by the Jewish establishment in the United States, those are gone forever. They will never be revived. And in that sense, Nolte has championed over Lipstadt, championed over Habermas. His influence is definitely notable in Gellately, despite the one paragraph, and a little bit of Snyder. But in reality, we shouldn't even have to have this debate, right? You know, it should be just accepted. Communism, as bad, if not worse, than National Socialism. National Socialism reaction to communism. Right? Pretty obvious from all of the evidence we've had for quite some time. And I will leave it at that and wrap it up. Hopefully, people will, again, get something out of this kind of historiographical rambling of mine. But I did shave, so I wouldn't look like a total bum. And if you have any comments, put them down below when I put this up. And I will see everybody on the flip side, I guess. All right.